we'll get all our friends around us and we'll sing a song together.
1, 2, 3, 4. My body's nobody's body but mine. You run your own body, let me run mine. And again. My body's nobody's body but mine. You run your own body, let me run mine.
When I'm touched, then I know how I feel. My feelings are mine and my feelings are real.
Okay, welcome everyone to Pedophiles Down Under. Today we're privileged to have another guest who was connected with the Wood Royal Commission, and this is Laurence. Laurence, welcome to the show.
Hey Fiona, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. What about yourself?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I'm still sitting here in Canberra waiting for justice, but one day at a time, I guess we'll get there, eh?
That's going to be a long wait,
yeah,
isn't it?
That's all right. I've got a big heart and a big fire to sit around. I'm okay.
Okay. So, Laurence, why don't you tell everyone a bit about yourself, starting with the fact that you're an Indigenous Australian. You identify as such, don't you? And you're quite proud of that.
I identify as such. I'm very proud of that. My mother was a fostered stolen generation lady who my father got pregnant when she was 15, and it was all covered up because of the things that go on in those days. And then I came around through a accident because my mother forgot to take the pill, and my father tried to murder me when I was still in my mother's womb, and really disliked me even when I was born. So when I was 9 months old, my mother was able to escape from his clutches, but left my brother and I alone with him. We were adopted by our grandparents, so that's where I identify as because I was a state ward and then adopted by my grandparents on my father's side. I've got the right to declare myself part of the stolen generation. I always knew that it was something different with me. I did not know I was Indigenous when I was 5, 6 years old because of my tantrums at school. I was sent to the psychiatrist at Gladesville. I usually did the usual things. We're having to draw clowns and draw a happy scene and what's your worst sad scene and all that sort of stuff. And that happened up at Gladesville in Sydney. I ran away from my father when I was 14 because the abuse at home was so horrific that I couldn't cope with it anymore. So I then moved back into my grandparents, and then I knew that I was going to have to be successful myself and look after myself because after my grandparents passed on, I would have nobody to rely on. So when I left school when I was 16, I moved to Sydney and started a job at a place in Crow's Nest and was introduced to a man by the name of Phil Cook. Now, Phil Cook was a man who issued charity permits. He was turning the brothel and pedophiles into a term called priests unto themselves. And how he got this position was the fact that he was part of the Australian legal on charge in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So when he came back to Australia, because he was a lawyer and had these connections, he was able to make people transparent to be able to get a permit for a charity. I fell in with Phil because I used to smoke a lot of pot, and he used to sell drugs. And many times I asked Phil, how can you work for the Smith family and all these other charities and deal drugs from amphetamines through to cocaine through to marijuana? And he said sometimes you've got to create a problem to have a reason to go in there and fix it up. And later on in life I've seen that's what they've created again and again in Australia, is by first sending in the drug dealers to destroy people and then sending the developers to take the land. And so when Bill informed me that on my 16th birthday that he was quite willing to pay for a 10-year-old for me, I declined and started a bit nervous because he then started putting pressure on me. He told me he was gay and that he was interested in me, and I told him I'm not gay. So I woke up one morning feeling pretty groggy, supposed to stay at his place down at Milson's Point. and woke up one morning with my clothes all tired with a sore ass. And I wondered what was going on. By this time I had quite a heavy amphetamine habit as well as pot, as well as alcohol. Just trying to cope with my grievances.
Self-medicating.
So I didn't, self-medicating. So I wasn't too sure what was going on. But Phil was also a member of a bike club. And this bike club has links to their first chapter house being at Birch Grove. And this house is owned by a media person over in Washington called Robert Penfold. And Robert Penfold is one of the big people within the distribution of child pornography. Penfold Wines and Penfold, that used to bring in a lot of the drugs. Bill was against heroin, but they decided to use the drug amphetamine to destroy the Australian people and be able to have access to the children, because heroin meant that people were tied to one spot, whereas amphetamine meant that they could still move around and create chaos to give them a reason to go in and fix it up. So after a couple of nights I stayed there again, and I woke up during the period of him raping me, because the whole house was just gun racks all around the house, all around the walls, all just gun racks of automatic rifles, every sort of rifle there was. The front door had a prison door behind it, so you couldn't. It looked like an ordinary front door, but you opened it a little bit, and then they'd unlocked this other door, which was a prison door, so that people couldn't run in on him. So after he raped me the second time, I freaked out and ended up down at Woolloomooloo Youth Centre. And this lady by the name of Debbie conversed with me, and I told her about being raped and all that, and what had happened and how guilty I felt, and I needed help. And so she marched me into the person's office who ran the youth centre, and his name was Frank Houston. And Frank Houston was a convicted pedophile in New Zealand by a Salvation Army officer, and certain people within Macquarie Investments and other people within Salvation Army and other places brought him to Australia to work in a youth centre after being a convicted pedophile in New Zealand. And he was put there to pick up the damaged children for them.
And Frank Houston, of course, started off Hillsong Church in Australia.
Yes, and now Hillsong has now migrated back to America because they are aware that they're about to come undone big time. So good luck to the American people. But when Debbie put me into the office and I explained to Phil what had happened to me, he did not want to ring the police. However, Debbie forced him to ring the police in front of her, and then she got called out of the office to see someone while he was out of the office. While she was
this
out
Frank?
Of the office.
While Frank was out of the office, you mean? Or...
No, Frank. Debbie was called out of the office to deal with something.
Yeah.
And I was left in the office with Frank Houston.
Frank Houston.
Alone.
Yeah.
So he walked around the table, grabbed me by the throat, threw me against the wall, and told me that he just rung Phil, and that they were on their way around to pick me up. I freaked out. I didn't know what to do. I looked and realised that this Phil was even more connected with these guys as well.
Wow.
So I when Debbie walked back into the office, she realised that something had happened, and I asked her to get me out of the office. Once we got out of the office, I told her what had happened, and she freaked. We drove around town for about an hour she was trying to find out somewhere to put me safely, because of the network that these people actually run, the actual charities and foster homes and all that, would have been able to be put in if I'd gone through the youth centre. So the only place she could end up putting me was in a drug rehab. And that drug rehab was run by the Salvation Army. I was only 17. It's called Booth, William Booth, and it is in Central in Sydney. And there was a matron there by the name of Margaret Watson. And the two people who were in charge of the rehab were Brian and Margaret Walters. And during the Woodrow Commission, Brian and Margaret Walters were transferred to the United Nations to stop us all from being able to get evidence through to the United Nations. So they were heavily involved in this.
So
when
Brian
I
and
started-
Margaret Walters were heavily involved in child trafficking, are you saying that?
They're very heavily involved in the covering up of it. I'm not
Okay.
too aware of how well they participated, but
Yeah.
Brian and Margaret Walters now are very powerful people within the Salvation Army,
Okay.
as they were officers.
Well, and the Salvos
I
have...
was sent there by John Howard.
Yeah, well, the Salvos have also just been reported to the current Royal Commission and been investigated and found that they were involved in pedophilia.
They weren't, yes, and they weren't just involved in pedophilia. One of the things that was overlooked by the current Royal Commission was that the evidence that the uncles program, where boys were removed from the foster homes all the weekend by the uncles and raped and then returned
Yes.
Monday morning.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they refused to investigate that, which would have exposed who these uncles were.
Yeah. And that's what it
Yeah.
is, isn't it? The current Royal Commission just whitewashes everything, doesn't it, like that? It does. It like the current Royal Commission did a tiny bit of an investigation into Hillsong, but then wouldn't allow anybody to testify publicly who had the real dirt on Hillsong and Frank Houston and child trafficking and kiddie porn snuff filmmaking and all that sort of stuff that Hillsong's
Yes, that's right.
involved in.
I was that upset when I heard that Brian Houston was to give evidence at the current Royal Commission, that I travelled from Canberra to Sydney at my own expense and turned up at the Royal Commission saying, "Hey, mate, I want to give evidence." They put me in front of the psychiatrist and the head investigator for the Federal Police and refused to let me give evidence. And they said Brian Houston would be appearing, and I was quite welcome to sit in the foyer, not in the courtroom, and see whether or not what happens. I was pretty upset, so I left. Brian Houston started giving his evidence, and he admits he said that no one will ever know exactly how much damage his father has done.
Yeah.
And they will know because people like myself and other people who are still alive were the ones he abused or were the ones he covered up because of the organised pedophile racket within the elite that which other people were involved in. So I ended up running away from Phil because I was terrified and put him in booth. I confessed to Margaret Watson what had happened to me, and she sent me downstairs to the head office where I met Brian and Margaret Waters, and they asked me what had happened, and I told them. And Brian Waters looked me straight in the face and said, "Bill Cook is a personal friend of ours, and we don't believe he would do something like that." I freaked out. I left the rehab the next day and got myself in trouble, getting drunk and all that sort of stuff, and abusing people because I was terrified. And so I went back to my grandparents after a while and thought that as long as I hide and stay low, no one would know. However, the dreams and the reoccurrence of the programming that Phil had put me through when I was with him to actually become an enabler and all that, which I am aware of now. Back then I wasn't aware of. My guilt and fear ended up getting to me, and I ended up being put into another rehab. This rehab was actually run by Christian Life Centre.
Oh no! Wow.
I had not put all the pieces together yet. I was a confused kid, and I wasn't aware what I was actually up against. I thought I was up against an individual pedophile with a lot of power.
Yeah.
But then later on, when I found out that he did fostering and adoptions and charity work and all that, and spoke to several other survivors, it was then that all the jigsaw pieces started to fall into place. So while in Teen Challenge, I was there for just under 10 months. I gave an interview to two police officers from New South Wales from the Organised Crime Squad called Graham Tremblay and Gregory Sullivan. And they were the two main investigators for the Wood Royal Commission later on. So that Wood Royal Commission started 12 months later. So when I mentioned Phil Cook's name to them, they tried to seize all 3 tapes of the interview, because back then it was done by VCR, and the actual recorder, Scott, actually freaked out because he'd never been in this, he'd never seen that. He actually rung James Wood, the police officer actually rung Magistrate Wood from the office at the reception of Teen Challenge to get authority to seize my copy of the tape, which was illegal. One of the ministers, and this is why I'm aware that there must be some good people still in there among them, one of the ministers, without the police seeing it, took my tape and walked out of the office. They freaked out. They tried to abuse us and demanding where the tape was, but for some reason this man stood staunch and refused to let them know where the tape is. I'm still yet to know where that tape is.
Yeah.
So that was quite scary. I started to realise that there must be more to this than my little story.
Yeah.
And I left the rehab and thought nothing of it. The Wood Royal Commission was starting to process, and I was laughing because by this time I had started putting the jigsaw pieces together. Like one of the things that Phil wanted me to do was come to Commissioner Lowes' house, and Commissioner Lowes was the Commissioner of New South Wales Police at the time, and was a very eccentric file.
How do you spell his last name?
Lowes. Commissioner Lowes.
Okay.
I think it's Lowes. I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
Commissioner Lowes is now up in Darwin. He's retired up in Darwin.
And you witnessed New South Wales Police Commissioner Lowes being a pedophile at the time?
No, I did not witness it. Phil wanted me to go to his house to party.
Oh.
And it was later on when I spoke to another survivor who told me that Commissioner Lowes was having pedophile parties at his house, and that is why he was removed as commissioner, and why they had to bring the police officer, Mr. Ryan, from England to Australia to oversee the New South Wales police, because they could not find a police officer in Australia who was not under their control in some way.
Right.
So they brought Commissioner Ryan over to replace Lowes during the Royal Commission.
Yeah.
Now, Commissioner Ryan was famous for shutting down the Welsh miners for Margaret Thatcher and destroyed the mining communities of Wales and all that, which were on strike when he was just an ordinary police officer in England. So he was handpicked to cover up the links between the House of Lords in England and Australia, because many of the House of Lords used to use Australia as a stepping stone into the pedophile networks within Asia above Australia. So they used to actually have pedophile tours, snuff tours, all sorts of horrible stuff. So while I was, I gave because I given my evidence to Graham Tremblay and Greg Sullivan, I thought, they're going to bring it all undone. However, our evidence was that controversial that rather than produce us to the Wood Royal Commission, they removed us from it and started another court case. So that unless you were involved in it, you would not see that this court case was the elite had been withdrawn from the Wood Royal Commission and put into a separate cult case, so that they could not get the link to the House of Lords and the elite who organised the pedophile parties to tours. And that case was put under a heading called the Children of God. And at the same time, they to remove the monetary factor away from the Wood Royal Commission, they started another case called the Bottom of the Harbour Scheme, which was about the money laundering. So by separating all the cases, no one could see the big picture.
Yeah, because I know as a victim, and I witnessed the big link between child trafficking, armed trafficking, drugs trafficking. So they all went hand in hand, didn't they?
Well, they went hand in hand, as in the sense that many of the communions that they do with their rituals, the the wine was actually laced with hallucinogenics and amphetamine to actually entice a child into confidence to actually participate in sexual acts. So drugs were a major part of the network, and so were psychologists and psychiatrists, who then went from being the most unauthorised group of doctors within the world to the most powerful.
And who are they?
The psychiatrists. The Psychiatrists and Psychologists League of Australia, which was controlled and still is by his associates, Professor Kidman.
Anthony. So you're saying Dr. Anthony Kidman, who was my abuser as well?
Dr. Anthony Kidman was one of the major shutdown people to shut down the fact that Bert Newton and many of the other elite within the entertainment industry, from Liberace to other very high-profile people, had raped children, and they got away with it. The main groomer for him was a man who is also a convicted pedophile by the name of Johnny Young. Now, the Children of God had a show in Paris where children would dance for people naked. Johnny Young took this show from France, because he was a member of the Children of God, went to Channel 9 in Sydney and made a show called Young Talent Time. Now, the Young Talent Time academies for performing arts were a grooming point for having access to children who were talented. And they used to use manipulation and blackmail on these young children. If you want to make it in the entertainment industry, you have to sleep with me.
Yeah.
So Johnny Young was a convicted pedophile in Singapore.
Yeah.
And very few people in Australia are aware of this because they covered it up. Where was the bloke from Hey Dad hiding? Singapore. Where did Mr. Anthony Kidman go to put on a false death so that everyone thinks he's dead? Singapore. Whereas the capital of the pedophile network in Asia, Singapore. Between there and a country called Burma. They are the two main countries that orchestrate and get paid to actually provide children for these elites. So Phil Cook...
yeah. So with Kidman, you were talking about you were aware of his connections, and there were some other connections.
I was aware of his connections because just by fortune, after I left Teen Challenge, I went back to work and I met a young lady on the street and asked her for a coffee, if she would like to come for a coffee. And her name, I'm not allowed to mention, but we ended up getting married. And before we got married, though, she confessed that she'd grown up in a cult called the Children of God, and that her father was a man by the name of Amos Nichols, and Amos Nichols was one of the first operatives of the American military into Vietnam. It was when this lady and myself got together that all of a sudden all the jigsaw pieces started to fit, because she filled in all the little spaces that I hadn't been able to see. So we got married. She told me about Amos, her father, being a man who left the Waco compound 3 days before the massacre, and actually did a radio interview in America 3 days before it. Amos Nichols then went on the run. He linked up with Mr. Kidman in Honolulu, Hawaii, and because Australia had such an easy access to children legally through the adoption and foster systems, he then came to Australia and stayed in Australia for a while, had more children here, and then went to India for about 8 years to abuse children over there where it was legal. In India at that stage, it was very legal to actually buy children. So he then came back to Australia, and they were in a family house. And the family are very powerful people who provide children for abuse, and if they film it, and if you're a politician or a captain of industry or in a position in a job that they would like to be able to have access to your information, they film it, and then you're blackmailed. Many of the Australian Prime Ministers they did this to. Many of the Australian government, people within the Australian government, they did this too. However, there are several within the Australian government who actively participated anyway. They weren't blackmailed into it. However, all the New South Wales police covered it all up because it was such a thing, because many of the magistrates were child abusers and involved in the Wood Royal Commission and were named in the Wood Royal Commission. Everyone from Bob Carr, who is a convicted pedophile. Bob Carr was Premier of New South Wales, and Bob Carr molested 2 boys in a hotel while he was in state parliament, who were the children of an aide. And this aide was going through a horrific divorce and had brought his children to work, and we had left them in this motel suite, with several in a row, that the New South Wales New South Wales government had hired, and Bob Carr molested them, abused them, raped them. And then the father came back, his kids told him, and it was all put under a parliamentary privilege and sealed. Compensation was paid, and it was all covered up. And that's where they cover up a lot of these cases, is they actually pay money to the actual victims, and they get made to sign a gagging order. And they're gagged and they're never allowed to speak about it again. So, and many of the people from the Children of God ended up that way. Bob Hawke started the Wood Royal Commission because he actually had an idea that he wanted every child to be out of poverty. And it went against the curriculum of the Costello brothers and the other organised pedophiles within the actual charities, politicians and all that. Mr. Costello ended up becoming Treasurer of Australia under the other evil pedophile connected person, Prime Minister John Howard. Costello orchestrated all the bottom of the harbour scheme through St George Bank, and that made up another bank called St George Building Society, that made a bank called the New South Wales State Bank. And they're laundering all the drug money, all the brothel money, all the pedophile money through false charities. And it was when my ex-wife told me this that I realised Phil's place. I realised he was the man who did all this. Phil was then arrested because they couldn't cover him up completely, and he appears in the Sunday program on the 28th of November 1998 complaining that they wouldn't give him all his money back, even though he was the main witness in the bottom of the harbour scheme. And I honestly believe at that stage that some people were going to actually have him charged for his pedophile and fraud and laundering of illicit funds and all that. However, by the time it came to court, I think he was either dead or missing. And he was called the witness that was rolled. And it was on Channel 9, Sunday program, 28th of November, 1998. And I remember sitting there watching him and knowing this is the man who raped me, and even though his face was covered up. So I rung Graham Tremblay because I still had the organised crime card, that business card from the New South Wales Police that he'd given me. So I rung the number on there thinking, oh, well, I've had enough. I want to, what's going on? So I rung this number, and it had been transferred, and it was Commissioner Ryan's private police number. I was transferred straight to the Commissioner of New South Wales reception. He freaked out, did not understand how I got the number. I explained to him how I got the number, and he put me through to Graham Tremblay. I spoke to Graham Tremblay, and Graham's going, well, be quiet, Laurence, there's people listening on the side. And I said, that's why I'm saying this, Graham. I don't give a rat's bum about you. You never gave a rat's bum about myself and other survivors. You took our evidence and then told us that you'd give us new IDs, you'd give us a fresh start in another country. And then once you got our evidence, you said they could not do anything for us unless there was a conviction. And there was no convictions in the Children of God cases because many of the ministers of government were being blackmailed by this group called the Family, and many of them were active participants within the Children of God.
And that's the Family, that's the same one that Julian Assange came from?
Yes,
okay.
And it was the same Children of David Moses. It was started in the Lighthouse Foundation over in California by the man who, Wilkinson. It came out of the Wilkinson Crossing the Switchblade movement of the Lighthouse Foundation about helping people in underprivileged. But these predators got in among them and started to abuse children.
Because I thought David Wilkinson himself was pretty clean.
So did I. I honestly believe that he had a good intentions, but his under minions, once he set up the Lighthouse Foundation, my ex and I spoke about it many times, and we worked out that he did have a fair go. He was doing it, but when the Lighthouse Foundation went to California because of the drugs and the fact that he had admitted to participating in David Wilkinson in the book, admits the only way he could get in there was to actually participate and smoke a bit of pot with them and act like them, and then they let them in. So I'm still wary about David Wilkinson because he got into the scene of the unwanted within America, who were the drug addicts and the prostitutes and all that.
Yeah.
I've never...
I didn't know he did that. I read The Cross and the Switchblade when I was 15, and partly why...
We all read it.
Yeah, but I don't remember that in it. I'll have to have another look.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a movie called The Cross and the Switchblade too. And the bloke from Tips actually plays the head gangster in that movie. Yeah. Because it's all about street gangs and him going into the street gangs and trying to help them.
In New York,
So, in New York. So that's where the evangelistic movement, Amos Nichols had become an evangelist by then. He was also an American officer. He'd also been done tours in Vietnam, and his family owned Tonka Toys.
Oh, wow.
So he had a lot of Amos Nichols' mother and father owned Tonka Toys. It was originally an engineering factory, and Amos turned it into a toy factory when their form of engineering was not needed because they'd got better technology. So rather than close the factory and put 200 people out of work, he turned it into a toy factory.
Very successful one.
Models, very successful. So many of the models of Tonka Toys were actually designed structures to see how big, how strong they were. Yeah. So, and with that, he toured the world with under the guise of being a Christian minister within the Assembly of God movement, which is what the Children of God are part of. Yep. And be able to abuse children without anyone knowing.
Wow.
He horrifically abused his own daughter, who and sold her to other men while in India.
Wow.
And also in Australia. And it was because of this that my ex left the Children of God and actually divorced her parents to actually get away from him, because he was that connected with that many people, Amos Nichols, that the only way that the docs could protect her from him ever being able to find her was to divorce her parents. And she became the first person ever to divorce her parents in Australia. And from that pilot case, it is now possible for anyone to divorce their parents in Australia. Wow. So Graham Tremblay and Greg Sullivan came up and spoke to my ex-wife when we got married, and I flipped out. And it was then that they said to me that, if my ex spoke to them, they'd give us new identities, move us overseas, set us up. And so I actually sincerely thought that they were trying to do the right thing. So I agreed to, because my ex did not want to do it at first, really. She just wanted to go away and start a new life with us and try and forget all the horrors, even though the nightmares and and other things used to be quite horrific on her. So when
So you agreed again.
So
You believed them again that they would help you out like this if you gave a statement.
and after we did, and after my ex-wife gave her evidence about everything, and she was fingering some very dangerous people, everyone from the head of DOCS, Department of Community Service, as these were men who'd had sex with her as a child.
Who was the head of DOCS at the time?
I'm not sure. He was the head of DOCS on the Central Coast. He wasn't the big bloke. He was the head of DOCS on the Central Coast.
Oh, yeah.
And they send most, when the children do escape, they send most of the children to the Central Coast because it's a protection area for the pedophiles.
Yeah.
And they protected by a man by the name of Les Darcy, Professor Les Darcy.
Know that name.
Professor Les Darcy is the head of the mental health unit at Gosford. And just by coincidence, he is a very high deacon within a church of the Assembly of God. And his son, who is a New South Wales police officer, works in King's Cross.
Yeah.
So it was very easy for him to pick up the children who had been able to escape and were on the streets and put them in a place where they'd never be believed. By putting them in a mental health unit and giving them a Mental Health Act 32 means that they are insane and cannot be believed in court. So many of the abused children were put under the Mental Health Act to protect the pedophiles.
Of course.
So it was quite, extraordinary that many years later when I rung this card that it went to Commissioner Ryan's office. I then realised just how big this was and what it entailed.
And your ex-wife named Anthony Kidman to the police or identified him from a photo or something, you're saying?
Anthony Kidman and Amos Nichols were associated in Hawaii and Australia. That is why she had to divorce her parents, was that this man, Mr. Kidman, could find anyone because he was the head of the psychologists of Australia. And he could blackmail anyone he wanted because anyone who'd spoken to a psychiatrist, he had access to their notes. So anyone who'd confessed some crime, if they were in a case against the family and the pedophiles, Mr. Kidman would threaten to and blackmail them by saying, well, you mention anything, we'll expose this about your past. And just, it's only coincidence, isn't it, that Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman met on Young Talent Time, run by Johnny Young. They both performed on Young Talent Time with Johnny Young, a convicted pedophile. He was famous for a song called Smiling. He was a rock and roll star from the era of Gary Glitter and all the other very unwell people.
Pedophiles. A lot of the kids came forward from Young Talent Time and said they'd been sexually assaulted on set, didn't they?
Yes, quite a few. One of the boys actually got sold to Liberace and taken back to America.
Jamie Redfern, wasn't it?
Yeah, Jamie Redfern was sold to Liberace.
He was sold, wasn't he? He was trafficked and set up as his little boy. And the whole world was told, oh, isn't this wonderful? He's given him a job opportunity or whatever, but he was actually sold to a pedophile.
Yes. So, and Tina Arena, Franco Arena's niece, was a member of Young Talent Time.
Yes.
And it is my belief that it was because of her and a man by the name of Craig McLaughlin from Neighbours, where other child abusers were set. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
You're saying about Craig McLaughlin, his involvement in Frank Arena, niece, Tina Arena.
Tina Arena and Craig McLaughlin, I believe, were the people who spoke out about Channel 9, and for that they tried to destroy their careers. Craig McLaughlin was unable to get work after he talked about what had happened.
Yeah.
He tried to form a band called Checkmate, and that failed because these people controlled the music industry as well. So,
and he was very talented, wasn't he? He was multi-talented, Craig McLaughlin.
He was a very multi-talented young man, yes. And Tina Arena, I believe because of her family being quite powerful, where she was able to withstand, and a lot of the pedophiles weren't game to touch her because of who her family were.
Yeah, right. And
So
she does
she's
come
got
across...
would have witnessed.
Yeah, she comes across as very strong, and she's very popular now, very successful in France.
That's right. She couldn't get successful in Australia because all the people who control the entertainment industry are involved in the Wood Royal Commission.
And yet Tina is a very good singer, and it turns out she's a very good composer. So she you know, and a good dance. She could dance as well. So she had all the ability, yet she wouldn't play to the pedophile tune, would she?
No, she wouldn't. So, and Franco Arena was one of the senators from New South Wales Parliament who was forcing the Wood Royal Commission through to try to expose them. So I honestly sometimes think that Franco Arena's a good person. Other times I'm not sure at all, because between her and another man who claims to be of Indigenous descent, who was a millionaire at the time, he was the financial backer to her to help the victims, even though this man, Mark McMurtry, had never spoken to any of us. He put himself in a position to represent us, and that is why we all got nowhere, because Mark didn't, when it came to the crunch where they forced Mark in court to try and name the survivors, he had no one. And so it collapsed. And then they destroyed Mark McMurtry, who was a millionaire, by economics, by refusing up to do business with him, all sorts of stuff until he was bankrupt.
Well, the same sort of thing that the Freemasons do in a town, don't they? If you don't join up, they'll destroy your business.
That's right. You know, it's very prominent, that sort of stuff in Australia, all over Australia. Like the Freemasons first came over here in the Rum Corps of the First Fleet, so they'd been established, and they were amazed at the Aboriginal spiritual culture being so Christian-like, and that there was so much history here that they lied about. You know, that has still been lied about, that, you know, we are slowly showing people our true history of what happened in Australia. The genocides, the rapes, the child abuse. Like, there's a poem called The Drover's Boy, which is a famous poem about the drover, a sheep drover, and his companion, who was a 10-year-old little girl dressed up as a boy. Everyone knows, and he loved her in some ways. You read between the lines of that poem, and they actually glorified pedophilia back then. It was normal. It was accepted. It was easy, because Aboriginal people were not even classed as humans back then.
No.
So, and many of the Aboriginal communities would sell their children in desperation to these abusers to protect the rest of the family. So you can't blame the Indigenous communities for participating. They had no choice. They had no legal standing, being classed as fauna and fauna. They had no ability to get justice because they weren't even classified as being human. So when someone killed an Aboriginal person, they could not be charged with murder because they weren't classed as being human in Australia. And it wasn't until the Mile Creek Massacre that the first time people were charged with murder for killing Aboriginal people. And you know, all that was all covered up. You know, all the past history of the many other people who'd visited Australia, from American whalers before the colony through to the Persians and the Egyptians who were here for a while, was all destroyed because the hieroglyphics that were similar to the Egyptian ones terrified them. So one of the first things the colony did was remove the spiritual culture to break the strong bond within the Aboriginal people and have access to the children and turn them into slaves.
Yeah.
The whole lot.
It's still going on though, isn't it? It's still happening, Laurence.
Oh, yeah. It's happening even more now than it did back then because it is now legal. They now use people like docs and, you know, this soul and generation, sorry day stuff to be able to remove the children, you know, rather than help the whole community or the whole family get over any issues, they remove the children because they then become dysfunctional and easy access for the child abusers. Whereas if they help the families to get out of the rut they're in, the children are safe. But no, they're not after keeping children safe. They're after having access to them to be able to manipulate and groom them into what they want them to be. So, and it's pretty hard to do that when your parents are there telling, no, I don't want my child to go through this. So, through drugs and alcohol and through the welfare system, which destroyed the Aboriginal communities because they then just sat on their laurels and accepted the money rather than stand up and fight for their rights. This current generation has picked up the gauntlet that the people who stood up in 1972 and before that, and are going with it again now because of the intervention and the removal of children of Aboriginal descent within the communities of Australia. So the young people have actually stood up again, and there is quite a heavy movement building between First Nations, Idle No More, and the Aboriginal Tent Embassy and its campaigners and people related to them, to the embassy, for their campaigns on saying we've had enough. And that is why the latest Royal Commission is so important. But just like all Royal Commissions, there's no convictions. The first Royal Commission that they had was the Black Deaths in Custody Commission. No convictions. The Wood Royal Commission, no conviction.
Do you agree? Do you agree, Laurence, that the current Child Abuse Royal Commission is just a fact-finding mission so that they know where to plug up the holes and cover it all up?
Well, what I worked out from the Wood Royal Commission and our participation in that is that this is a damage control unit. This is actually set up by the people within the pedophile unit, so to display to the Australian public that they've fixed the problem and that it's not going to happen again. However, all it's doing is legalising their crimes because it puts them under a Royal Commission seal and they get away with their crimes and they get away with taking all the money. Frank Houston and all his mates, or Brian Houston now, keep all the money. So it's actually legalised. All this Royal Commission does is find out all the evidence so that they can shut it in a case and seal it for 40 years. The evidence within the Children of God case, which was so heavily related to the Wood Royal Commission, was sealed in a 90-year seal by John Howard in the middle of the night because so many of his ministers and members of Parliament, and him being a lawyer himself from Gladesville, were paid. So he had to protect his treasurer, Peter Costello. He had to protect his, Peter Costello's brother, Tim Costello, who runs a very big charity, because they had all the money. They tried to send the Australian, Bob Hawke to try to bring them undone, had to float the Australian dollar. Because what they were doing is they were putting all the money into charity accounts in Australia, which was set up by Phil Cook and his crew. The money goes, because it's all cash donations, so they say, it's untraceable. So all the money goes into a charity account in Australia. They set up a mission account overseas. The money is then transferred from the charity account in Australia to the mission account overseas. $1 comes out of the Treasury to cover that money. Then Peter Costello would transfer the money from the mission account into an investment account and bring the money back into Australia's investment money. Another $1 would come out of the Treasury, or the same money coming back in. So Peter Costello was getting $2 for every $1, and the only way Bob Hawke could try and slow them down was to actually float the Australian dollar. And when they did that, Peter Costello made sure that very few people actually invested in business in Australia and caused this country almost to go to the verge of bankruptcy. And that was they did that because the fact that Labor were in power. then they were going to expose them and give the power back to the people. And that they didn't want that. They wanted the power within the government.
And yet Bob Hawke was one of my abusers, and so many of Gough...
amazing thing.
Yeah, and Gough Whitlam, and, like half of Gough Whitlam's party were, I remember being at pedo parties. And,
from Menzies.
Yeah, Menzies, yeah, I've heard about Robert Menzies. But I hadn't heard about John Howard.
Well, John Howard's wife is actually... father actually was on record for murdering Aboriginal people on their property. When the Aboriginal people asked John Howard, the government, to say sorry, his spin doctors put it onto him that the Australian public had to say sorry to the Aboriginal people. Now that's not what they wanted. They wanted John Howard and his wife to apologise personally for the genocide that her father had done, that she'd witnessed. So rather than let everyone know that her father, John Howard's wife, who's the main power thing, John Howard's only a lawyer, nobody. It's his wife is the power.
Who's the power broker? Yeah.
To hide her past genocide acts. John Howard shut it down and said that the Australian people have to say sorry, not us. And yet we wanted, because he knew that if he said sorry, they'd be liable. And so that's why that first sorry from the Australian people was so disgusting, because it came from the wrong people. The Australian people had nothing to answer from this. It's the government of Australia and the people within the government who are covering it all up and have covered it up for decades. The very first child abuse case in Australia was mentioned in the book called The Hangman, which was about the early colony. And it's about the executioner of the man who executed punishment for crime. Because he was hated by the convicts, he was put in a special room in the actual garrison of the Redcoats. And in the book, in the middle of it, it talks about him tying up his 12-year-old daughter and raping her and beating her and leaving her tied up. And if it hadn't been for the compassion of a young junior officer within the Redcoats who cut her down and took her away, no one would ever know what would have happened. And this is actually in a history book. So it was always part of the enactment of invading this country was to actually turn everyone into slaves and into whatever they want. And that's what they've done. So, yeah.
Now, let's discuss some of the names that you've mentioned to me prior to this show. So, Laurence, let's start with, you mentioned a couple of names. You said, we've got to talk about John Bell and Bruce Spence. Now, those are significant names to me because, as you know, they're two of my prime abusers. So tell me what you know about John Bell.
Well, John Bell was an enabler at a theatre at Woolloomooloo or Waterloo, and he did theatre acts with and educated people on, taught people how to act, many young people. And when Bert Newton was told to go away from Channel 9 when he was exposed for his prolific pedophile acts with himself and Graham Kennedy and Bert Newton's son.
Is that Matthew?
Matt. Bert Newton shared his son with Graham Kennedy. John Bell openly let Bert Newton come down to the theatre, and many children were abused out the back of the theatre by Bert Newton and John Bell.
Is that the Nimrod Theatre?
Who the parents had left there to thinking that they were safe, just like the kids who were left at the young talent schools. The parents thought the kids were safe, but they weren't. Many of them were told that, well, the only way you're going to make it in this industry is if you sleep with a few people, and and so I guess a lot of the children did, and it's sad thing that, you know, that's how they make it in the entertainment industry. You know, is you got to bed down with them at an early age.
Casting couch from a young age, eh?
Casting couch, literally, from a young age. You know, John Bell was a person who abused a lot of the Aboriginal children off the streets of Sydney. He was renowned for pretending to be feeding them, you know, giving them, you know, offering them help and all that sort of stuff. However, he was just doing it so that he could have access to children. And the savage thing is that is so horrific is that many of the children who have run away and in foster care and all that had been sexually abused to start with by their own siblings or parents or uncles and aunts. So they were already open to that suggestion. So people like John Bell and Bert Newton and Frank Houston and the other many child abusers knew this. So they knew how to entice the child to sexual acts, and they knew that if they raped the child because they were unwilling to participate, then they could turn around and say, "Oh no, she's just, you know, he or she's just doing another false claim of rape, just like they did before."
Yeah, right.
Or they'll say, "Oh, the child participated willingly because they'd been raped before, so they knew what they were doing." And many of them got off by that, you know, just statements like that. That once a child knew what they were doing in sex, then they're open to it. That was the excuse. Like many of during the Wood Royal Commission, it went to the point where they actually blamed the government. They twisted the whole case around, and one of the witnesses turned around and said, "Well, the reason I'm corrupt is because the government put me here. They expected me to." The corrupt New South Wales government, this was so prolific that when the Premier Rand took over the government, no one wanted to be Premier because they were all terrified of the criminals who actually ran the Parliament of New South Wales. And so no one wanted to be Premier, and finally they coerced Neville Wran into it. And Neville Wran is an original Balmain boy. And Balmain is the centre point for the pedophiles. Alan Jones established himself in Balmain. You know, and many of the people who played for rugby union knew that he was openly a pedophile. You know, Alan Jones, the cases at King's College were all covered up out of embarrassment that these wealthy people's children had been molested by Alan Jones while he was a PE teacher there. And they were that ashamed that rather than have him done over, they covered it up because they didn't want their children to be known as having been abused. So, you know, Alan Jones was a pedophile even then. You know, he groomed children at the church, at the school. You know, he received love letters from some of the students at the school. And Alan Jones then went on to become captain of the rugby union of Australia because he was such a blackmailing sort of person and had got himself into that position. And when he was in France, he was actually found in a motel room with a young boy having sexual relations while he was coach of the Australian Wallabies rugby union side. He then threatened to expose it all, and because they were going to jail him in France for it, they wanted him. And he actually blackmailed Kerry Packer to actually get him out of the jail in France and bring him back to Australia. And it is still one of the mysteries of today as to what Kerry Packer paid or did to the French court to have them release Alan Jones on bail. And as soon as he came back to Australia, he never ever went back there to face the charges. So, you know, the case was, I don't know what happened with that case. But Alan Jones was also found having sexual relations with young boys in toilets in England as well, just before that. So everyone knew he was a prolific pedophile, but back in the 80s, it was so prominent among the communities of Australia because it was accepted but never spoken about that he got away with it. People didn't care back then because so many of them had either been abused themselves or were abusers. And, that was one of the things that I found very shattering, was that many of these people like Royal Powers turn around and say that they were abused. Well, I was abused and I never became an abuser. So, it's these people who say that their pedophiles are born that way. I'm sorry, it is a learned condition. They taught themselves to be sexually aroused by those sort of things. And that's a learned behaviour. It's not a natural behaviour. So, and Don Lane was the same. Don Lane was a prolific pedophile, horrific American pedophile who had numerous cases of child abuse against him that were dropped because of intimidation of the witnesses and the actual victim by Don Lane's criminal friends. He wasn't called Don for nothing, the Don. It went to the point where one family were able to be strong enough to actually force the police to arrest him and have him charged. And while the New South Wales police were coming through one door of the Channel 9 network to arrest him on the set of the midday show, which by coincidence Bert Newton was very prominent on, and other police had rung Channel 9 to inform them that detectives were coming there to arrest him for pedophilia. So he was thrown straight on a plane and taken back to America until the case was paid, till the case had gone through and the victim had been paid off and gag money. And then he was brought back to Australia, but by then no one wanted to know him. He'd been ostracised by the good people within the
industry.
Communities of industry, and he never ever got another chance in Australia because people were just fed up with him. So, that's why he never made it.
That was Channel 9. So Don Burke was another one on Channel 9, wasn't he?
Oh, Berkey was a prolific. Berkey lost his fortune through paying gag money to the many, many victims of his sexual orientation for children. That was the main reason why Carey never ever let him come back to Channel 9, was the fact that he'd been done for so many times for pedophilia, and it was covered up.
Now, you heard that independent of me. I heard it from Emma Furness, and she was told it by a current affair journalist who interviewed Emma Furness about Hillsong and about Brian Houston going hysterical outside the Royal Commission. It was a bit of a funny story where Brian attacked Emma when she said something to him, and he's screaming, I'm not a pedophile at Emma. So that was on a current affair, and that journo said all of this to Emma Furness, who fed it to me, and now you've said it independent of Emma Furness. So, that's...
Well, Frank Houston was a pedophile, but this is what I'd like to know is that, who it was within the Macquarie investment industry who financed him when he was released from jail for raping a boy for pedophilia, and even though he was never to be worked with children again in New Zealand, who was it within Macquarie Investment where Malcolm Turnbull, the now Prime Minister of Australia, sat on that board, who financed him to come to Australia and cleared his record to run a youth centre?
Yes.
Who was it?
And also...
Macquarie Investment, the bottom of the harbour scheme. The bottom of the harbour scheme is now the Panama Papers.
Yeah.
It's all linked.
And that's linked with Bond University and Alan Bond, that Macquarie Investment place. And Malcolm Turnbull used to be paid a fortune every month in consultation fees by Bond University, which, goodness knows, we thought it was a bit of a money laundering organisation, to be honest. So it was Australia's first private university. It's so corrupt, incredibly corrupt and pedophile infiltrated like you wouldn't believe. So that was Malcolm Turnbull and Macquarie Finance involved there too. So, yeah, very interesting.
It also involved Malcolm Turnbull's wife when she was a member of Sydney City Council. Many of the child kiddie brothels were opened because she cleared them for a business licence, and then the fire warden cleared them when he did the fire inspection. So rather than, the business would be registered as a laundry, for example. So, he'd go in there and he'd see it set up as a brothel. But he'd be paid as long as all the fire ordinance was legit. He was paid by being able to have free sex at any of them, by just clearing that for its fire safety and not reporting that the business was not a laundry, but it was actually a brothel. And what happened was Sally Ann Huxtap, who had caught on to these organised pedophiles and what was actually going on between the underworld and Roger Rogerson and his crew, who ran these brothels and provided protection for the pedophiles in the underworld. Excuse me, I lost my train of thought there for a minute.
Kerry Chikarov's...
Sally Ann was given authority to write, was writing stories for Playboy magazine and Penthouse magazine in Australia. And so she was asked to write a story on prostitution because she was a prostitute and a heroin addict. So she wrote a story about the child pedophile, the child sex slave industry in Sydney. So she wrote this story, and it was going to be put in the magazine, and it passed the owner of the magazine's desk, who's known as the King of Porn of Australia, and that is Malcolm Turnbull. And as soon as he realised that all his people were going to come undone, he authorised the murder of Sally Ann Huxtap.
Oh, so our current Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, ordered the murder of Sally Ann, the journalist.
He ordered the murder of Sally Ann because he was actually a lawyer for Kerry Packer.
Yes. And
he was sent to America to negotiate the rights for Playboy in Australia with Hugh Hefner, so that Kerry Packer was meant to own the rights to the Playboy.
And Hefner's a big pedophile too, we all know that.
And so what happened was he went over there as Kerry Packer's lawyer, but when he came to ownership of the contracts, he put his own name down instead of Kerry Packer's. So he owns the rights to all pornography in Australia. And yet he's the Prime Minister of this country now. They've gone, that's how hard, because they use that position as Prime Minister as a protection mechanism so that you cannot persecute him because of parliamentary privilege. Even though many of us know about this stuff and many of us have tried to expose it, parliamentary privilege means that they can shut you down at any time.
And what was Sally Ann's last name?
Huxtap.
How do I spell that?
Huxtap, I'm not too sure.
Huxtap.
Sally Ann Huxtap. Ray Martin did a story on her.
Yeah, right.
Ray Martin, one of the only people I trust within Channel 9, because he actually tried to expose them all and it tried to expose how corrupt they were to the point where a bloke by the name of Cliffy Saxon, Ian Saxon, who was an entrepreneur, music and entertainment person, was found with a whole millions of dollars going mouldy in garages and all that from prostitution money, drug money, and it was they were making so much money out of it they couldn't launder it quick enough. So Ian Saxon was using Phil Cook to launder the money, and this is what the bottom of the harbour scheme and the witness who was rolled was about, because Ian Saxon stood up in court when he was jailed for this, for money, all this undeclared money and where it was from, and declared openly that he'd give someone $1 million if they could get him out of jail. By the end of the week, they opened the cell at Long Bay Jail. He was not there. He turned up in California, being protected by the pedophiles in California, until Ray Martin. And even though the federal police knew he was there, everyone knew he was there, no one was willing to bring him back to Australia. So Ray Martin went over there with 60 Minutes and exposed him. And that embarrassed the government. But even then, Ian's case was covered up and he was never charged with any of the events apart from tax evasion. So, and Ian Saxon did time for that. And yet, who let him out of jail? How do you leave a cell in one of the most secure prisons in Australia, Long Bay. And yet he came back to Australia, did his time, and is now a free man. He had a brother called Richard Saxon, who, when Ian was overseas, was the person who kept it going with Phil Cook, who was linked to a bloke by the name of Jasmine, and Jasmine was a sergeant of arms of a bike club, as was Phil Cook, member of the same bike club. And this bike club had its first chapter in Penfold's house at Birchgrove in Balmain. So, Birchgrove
my
in
Lord.
Balmain.
So all these bikie laws, what a load of garbage all these anti-terror laws are that they've introduced. When the crooks,
when the club found out what these people within their club were doing, they threw them out and were actually after them themselves. They were disgusted with what was going on. They had no idea, so they say. And 99% of the blokes within the biker community that I've met and know are totally against this sort of stuff. They're the sort of blokes who end up picking up the children and trying to put them back together because they end up destitute and nowhere. And out of the kindness of these people's hearts, because they know how hard it is, they try and protect the children. And yet the Australian government doesn't want people to protect these children. So any group or culture that tries to protect them gets attacked and persecuted and shut down. So I've got a lot of time for a lot of the bikers. A very lot of time, because they've been willing to stand up and say enough's enough, and support a lot of people in being able to speak their story without being fear of being threatened or hurt, or other people around them being hurt, because they're standing up and talking the truth. So there's a lot of stuff about Malcolm Turnbull that is shady. The Panama Papers is one. And it's only coincidence that Neville Wran, the man who they made Premier when no one wanted to be Premier of New South Wales at the start of the Wood Royal Commission, and Malcolm Turnbull made all their money in Siberia after the collapse of Russia in gold mines. And all that money went to the went to the island accounts. You know, here's an Australian government that chased an icon of Australia, Paul Hogan, demanding to know how much money he has in accounts overseas so that they could tax him on it, and almost send him bankrupt and destitute in Australia, seized everything off him because they were saying, "Oh, you're hiding money overseas, that's tax evasion," and they hunted him all up for years, and he opposed them, and it almost bankrupted him. Recently Malcolm Turnbull has been found to be doing the same thing. I do not see the tax man going after him. Where's the equal justice in Australia when an icon of Australian TV, Paul Hogan, from Crocodile Dundee and all that, gets chased for tax evasion, and yet Malcolm Turnbull recently got shown to be involved in the Panama Papers, and nothing's been done. So there's a lot of corruption at high levels, even to the point where when I was speaking to Commissioner Ryan who was brought over to Australia to cover up the links between the House of Lords and the organised pedophiles in Sydney, which was networked through Alexander Downer, and I'll get to Alexander Downer in a minute. But when all that was orchestrated, I forgot what I was going to say because I brought Alexander Downer in. Oh yes, Kerry. Yeah. So when I sent my brief to Kerry Chikowski in New South Wales Parliament by post, and I've still got the post receipt to show that it was a registered letter. And I rang her 2 days after I sent the package, and she was so determined because Franco Arena was standing up with Mark McMurtry and trying to expose these people. She was going to table me in Parliament in New South Wales. And the day before I was meant to come into her office to be put down on the floor of Parliament to expose all this, she got exposed for smoking marijuana and allegedly hanging out with criminals. As soon as they became aware that she was going to table me on Parliament and then nothing would be taken back, they shut her down by exposing that she smoked a bit of pot. So that's how powerful these people are. And it's people within the legal bar system, the psychology system, the entertainment system, and the medical system completely. Malcolm Turnbull is one of the biggest owners of pharmaceutical industry in Australia. So by creating a problem with these drugs and all that, it gives him permanent clientele for his legal prescriptions if they ever get clean off the amphetamines that is now going around. So, it's a win-win for him. First, he gets money out of the drug system to put them on the drugs, and then when they actually go through the mental health system, it gives them fresh minds to experiment on that are stuffed up, and they try and, do what they want with them, and they gives them people to be able, guinea pigs to be able to experiment with their psychoanalytic drugs, which 9 times out of 10 do not work. No. And they tell you that when they in the mental health unit, this is an experimental drug, so they cover themselves legally by telling you that, but we think it might work for you. And most people sit there and believe what the doctor's saying, and okay. And once many of these substances, once they take them, they're not allowed, they can't stop because they replace the natural drugs in the system of the body, and so that shuts down. So they're hooked for life, which means that who gets the money? The pharmaceutical industry.
Malcolm
So
Turnbull.
the pharmaceutical industry, yes, has a lot to answer for. Who gets a cut for all pornography in Australia? Malcolm Turnbull.
Malcolm Turnbull.
So he has a lot of fingers and a lot of pies, and he's a very big criminal within the organised crime of Australia, let alone the world. So
you mentioned the name
Malcolm Turnbull.
Yeah, you mentioned Alexander Downer before, and you said that he had a bit of a nickname over in England.
Yeah. He was known as the colonial cocksucker. Alexander Downer went to English private school where the children of members of the House of Lords and the elite made him suck their dicks. And he was the main orchestrator between the House of Lords and the pedophile groups within Australia.
So you're saying the Westminster pedophile ring that Jimmy Savile and the royal family and everyone have been linked to?
Yeah, that's all Alexander Downer. He's linked in with all that. And he openly admits that his father murdered Aboriginal children and Aboriginal people because he didn't see them as human. He saw them as animals and savages. And Alexander Downer actually did a radio interview where he openly admits this. And his father was the ambassador for Australia in England, and that is why he was at this private school. And yet they saw him as the colonial cocksucker because they looked down on him because he wasn't from their people. He was just some colonial person who'd been
convict scum.
His father was the ambassador.
Yeah, convict scum because he wasn't part of the class system in England. Now, you've also mentioned another name, and that's John Avery, New South Wales Police Commissioner John Avery. You said you know something about him as well.
Oh, John Avery was the main person with Mr. Les Darcy and Kidman to cover up pedophile child sex acts within the Christian communities. Avery was a devout Christian, and if you were a Christian and got caught molesting children, and you were of high ranking, then he would step in and intervene and make a quiet case out of it, and then all you had to do was, tick the boxes that they put in front of you, saying that you'd gone to certain counselling sessions. Then they'd pay Mr. Kidman to say that, you're cured, and it was all covered up. So Avery protected all the pedophiles within the churches for years as New South Wales Commissioner, and had participated himself in acts of prostitution with very young girls. So that's one of the benefits of being a high-ranking New South Wales police officer, is that because you hang around with these criminals, sooner or later, you become one of them because they pay you off.
Yeah, Avery, he's one of the main people that I've reported. Oh, look, years ago, I've remembered him for years as being, it's with the internet that you can find all the faces, can't you? It makes it a lot easier. But he was at Bathurst City Hall, and he was in the Luciferian pedophile ritual, and he was there murdering kids. So I was there and I saw it with my own eyes. So, that's Avery.
A lot of there's a family house down on the border of Melbourne and Sydney where a lot of the children are held for this ritual killing. One of the most famous cases of cover-ups is the Beaumont children. That was organised pedophiles. And, there's a town out the back of South Australia that's a fly-in, fly-out zone where they actually keep the children in the houses, the kidnapped children, where millionaires and all that would fly in, do what they want, and then fly out. There's only one road into this town, one road out of this town. And if you try and go into this town, they'll let you come in, but you're very unwelcome.
Yeah.
And it involves
might not
everyone
leave.
in the town.
Might not leave. Now, got some other names here. John Laws, our famous 2GB radio.
Oh, the man with the golden voice.
Yeah.
No, John Laws was not the man with the golden voice. John Laws was known within the community as the man with the golden arm. John Laws was a prolific heroin user, and that's why he always wears sunnies, because he was always pinned. He overdosed several times, which is recorded by the New South Wales Ambulance Service, who in the end refused to visit his property out the back of Yarramalong, which is out the back of Wyong, on the Central Coast, which is where Les Darcy put all the children, because he was so abusive when they revived him from his heroin overdoses. So he tried to get help for his drug addiction many times, as did Neville Rand, but failed. And John Laws was renowned for child abuse with young people out of his farm at Yarramalong. He'd invite them out for parties out there, and where the children were raped and either murdered or drugged up that psychotic that no one would believe them once they're released back onto the street. And it's only coincidence, so that whose property is nearby? Neville Rand.
I think John Bell also had a property out there.
Yes, a lot of them do. They're all around there.
Somewhere around that area, going up there, yeah.
Well, Yarramalong Valley is there's one road in, one road out of Yarramalong Valley, and there's a cockatoo at the start of it near Woodbury's Inn. That as soon as you go past a certain point, everyone in the valley is informed that an unknown car is coming down the road. And John Laws owned the last property on the very end of Yarramalong Valley, to where there was a locked gate right next to a house, and this house observed every person who came in and left that property, and this gate was locked, and you had to go to this house to get the key. But once you got the key to that gate, you entered John Laws' property, and it was a world unto itself. And over the other side of the ridge was access to a lot of the other properties going through YE, right through to Muswellbrook. And whose famous property was at Muswellbrook? Kerry Packer. So it was very...
well, he was a huge pedo. Did you know about Kerry Packer being a pedophile?
The only thing I'd ever heard about Kerry was that he had abused one of his nieces.
Oh, right.
And that was the only thing that I'd heard about Kerry. However, Kate Fisher and Jamie Packer got into a bit of an incident where they had a threesome, which is the reason why Kate Fisher was forced out of the family, Packer, and had to sign a waiver saying that she'll never speak about what she saw at the Packer household. And part of her compensation by Kerry Packer for this silence was the most elite brothel in Bondi.
Oh.
That was part of her compensation. She owns the most elite brothel in Bondi.
Nice.
So that was the payoff for being the fiance of Jamie Packer, and getting Jamie Packer to jump into bed with another man in her cell, and this poor bloke had to run and hide. He was a local hairdresser in Bondi, who Kate Fisher had relations with before. So and poor Jamie was pretty drunk and high, and when he came to and realised what had happened, he was disgusted with himself.
Right.
And it really hurt him mentally, and so that's why Kerry Packer had Kate Fisher thrown out of the family and tried to hunt this hairdresser to make sure that he never ever spoke about it again. However, I've never ever heard of what happened to that hairdresser. It was but he was terrified. I was told that he ended up running away to New Zealand. So.
So that's so another link to all of this is John Singleton, who bought 2GB, radio station.
John Singleton is a prolific pedophile, heroin dealer, and outright criminal. But John Singleton was only the front man. John was only the person up the front. The actual person who actually had all the money and had all the connections to all the pedophiles in Sydney was a man by the name of Tom Langsky. And Tom Langsky's family owned coal ships and exported coal from Australia to England. And so he was came from a very wealthy family, and Tom is now passed away, and John Singleton is that prolific within being known as a pedophile, that even though he owns the stadium in Gosford, where many of the football teams from the National Rugby League play, he has been rallying for years to get a team on the Central Coast in the NRL, National Rugby League, and the reason why they refuse to is because John Singleton is linked to them. Because he owns their home ground at Gosford, they do not want him to have any participation in the NRL because of his pedophile acts. The same thing with Alan Jones. As you see, Alan Jones has nothing to do with rugby league or rugby union anymore, because Alan Jones was once coach of Balmain. And while he was coach, he was raping all the little boys. So Alan Jones is part of the same crew, and John Laws is part of the same
They're
crew.
all 2GB.
Well, yeah.
And
so
is Ray Hadley. You were saying Ray Hadley.
Yes.
He's also 2GB.
Well, Ray Hadley is also a Balmain boy. Ray Hadley is part of Alan Jones's crew, the original pedophile crew. Ray Hadley is protected by his son, who is a very powerful New South Wales police officer who protects pedophiles and protects his father for being one. So the whole of 2GB is just full of it. The only person I have concern for who has recently gone to 2GB is Ben Fordham, because in 1999-2000, when I decided to try and pull this up about the Children of God cases and the Wood Royal Commission, I was fed up with just hiding from them and having to live in pubs and all that, and work in building industry, under the radar, and just keep my head down and hope that they left me alone. He was the main person who... What was it? Ray Hadley? Who was it I was talking about, Fiona? There's so much in my head.
Oh, you were saying Ray Hadley's son was a New South Wales police officer.
Yeah. Well, that 2GB have recently taken a man in who actually filmed me, got a cameraman from Channel 9 to actually film me going into Surrey Hills Police Station, and because I had a warrant for my arrest for unpaid fines and all that, and I wanted to hand myself in, but I was terrified that I wasn't going to come back out. So I actually approached Ben Fordham and asked Ben to help me. And Ben was willing to help me, and he did. He thought he was disgusted with it. However, after he had me filmed and I got bail, have a guess who bailed me? Frank Houston.
What?
And I was terrified. I flipped. I'm thinking, well, do I stay in jail and possibly get murdered, by these pedophiles, or do I let Frank Houston, who was then an officer again within the Salvation Army and was the court support at in Central Court in Sydney, and he put his hand up to bail me, and then he threatened me outside the court, and he put me in foster house, the Salvation Army's men's hostel in Sydney, and that's when I kept talking to the detectives, and a detective by the name of Brad Young, who was part of Commissioner Ryan's personal police force that he brought over from England, because he had to bring his own police force,
He had to bring them his own.
secretaries, his own inner circle, because he couldn't trust any of the New South Wales police. So, but then after that, I ended up back in Gosford, and I got picked up by the police and thrown in the mental health unit under the care of Les Darcy. And as soon as I started abusing Les Darcy, he wrote me on. And it's all on record in Mandala that, many of the nurses in there listened to me and knew what was going on, and actually wrote in my notes that, what I'd said about Professor Les Darcy. And he was furious. He was totally furious because he'd been exposed for his cover-ups through he was the main psychiatrist for children on the Central Coast. So, yeah, he's, it's all networked in together in the sense that once the child had been abused and been fostered out, they had continuous access to that child, and the child would be submissive because they'd already been desensitised through the trauma of the first rape. So they'd participate more freely. And those who didn't participate freely were drugged and murdered.
So another big name that you mentioned was Molly Meldrum. You want to tell us about him?
Molly.
He's the Jimmy Savile of Australia, by the sounds.
Of course,
Countdown, hosted
many
Countdown
of the bands in Australia did not make it because they refused to participate in child sex acts at Molly Meldrum's parties. Molly Meldrum was a prolific child abuser, and you can tell the good bands who were not pedophiles or did not turn a blind eye to pedophilia, because they're the ones who never ever made it on the show Countdown. They never made it on Countdown, and they were bands like Cold Chisel, The Radiators, Rose Tattoo. One of the best men I've ever seen who actually tried to expose with Ray Martin the prolific attacks of children in
Angry Anderson.
Channel 9 was Angry Anderson.
Yeah, he was the
Male
real
got
deal.
time for that man. He was the real deal. He wanted them all
He hated
exposed.
him. Yeah.
And I've got a lot of time for that man, and a lot of time for him. And so, it was through my confidence that I was aware of people like that I kept going, I kept pushing, and I kept trying to have a voice but not being heard, or being shut down. And my own depression and my own fears and all that, and my own ability to sustain my own lifestyle went further and further down because I wasn't being listened to. And the very services that you go to get assistance when you fall behind in food or anything like that were the very people who I was trying to hide from, the Salvation Army. And then when I did go see the Salvation Army, they would write in their reports that they'd assisted me and they'd done this and this and this for me, and they'd done nothing for me. They'd kick me out the door, and I'd go off my head. The police would turn up and they said, "Oh, you've been helped." And I said, "Mate, they didn't do anything for me. On their paperwork it says it." And I said, "Yeah, they forged it." I said, "Look at me, I'm still standing out here. I haven't been given any assistance. I haven't even been given a food voucher." So, so I've got a lot of time for Angry Anderson and his stand against child abuse. And should be thanked for what he's done to try and help.
So another high-profile person in the entertainment industry is the actor who played Elvin Purple, Graham Blundell. You know something about him too?
Yeah. Graham Blundell was an enabler to be able to entice the young girls through a TV show called Alvin Purple, because they put the show on that all girls wanted to have sex with Alvin. for some reason. So because that was the persona of the TV show, was him having sex with all these women, it put him in the position that when he was out in public, all young girls wanted to fuck him. Wanted to have sex with him. So he was one of the main enablers who took young girls and boys to the pedophile parties. And they would openly participate because of the programming that they'd watched through the album Purple Show. You know, it was a subliminal enticement to be sexually active at an early age with adults.
Yeah, I remember the show. I remember that show. I wasn't allowed to watch it much, but I remember catching it. Now, what else? There was you heard about Chief Justice Kirby.
Chief Justice Kirby was a prolific pedophile, and the main cover-up for the pedophiles who did get caught within the high-profile ones. Just like he was in with Avery, and he was the magistrate Avery used to cover up and get all those boxes ticked and get it covered up. Magistrate Kirby, ran many of the Royal Commissions, from Black Deaths in Custody through to other Royal Commissions at the time. Because he was willing to cover up for the abusers. In every single Royal Commission that we've had in Australia, there's been no convictions.
No.
From the Black Deaths in Custody Royal Commission through to the Royal Commission into the Wood Royal Commission into pedophiles and corruptions within politicians, entertainment and business, all right, which is the Wood Royal Commission. Magistrate Kirby, Magistrate Wood answered to Magistrate Kirby on that. Magistrate Kirby nominated Mr. Wood because he knew he could not do it himself because of his past relations with covering up pedophiles. And if that had come out during the commission, if one of the children had stood up or anything like that, it would have destroyed the commission. So that Wood was hand-picked because he was also an abuser. Mr. Wood had an extreme bad alcohol issue, and in his drunkenness had abused several children, and they got away with it. So, he was quite a...
There's a daughter of his that I hear has gone missing. He had an adopted Eurasian daughter who, once she was spent, they murdered her when she was about 13.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Kirby was quite a ruthless man. The actual New
Commissioner
South Wales
Wood,
police
This is Commissioner Wood.
Yeah, Commissioner Wood. The New South Wales police used to have a contingent of officers who just looked after the magistrates to make sure... You there?
Yeah.
Yeah, to make sure that the magistrates did not publicly embarrass the legal system. And the magistrates knew this, so they could get away with whatever they wanted, and Commissioner Avery and his crew of pedophile protectors would protect them. And one of those main pedophile protecting police officers was Ray Hadley's son.
Right.
So that's where they covered it for each other.
Now, Commissioner Wood, you said he abused his own daughter who's still alive.
Well, I've been told that he abused his own daughter, who is still alive, and actually participates quite heavily in activism within the communities of Australia, and has used her position as a hiding spot, and has actually threatened me if I spoke about Mr. Wood. I can't think of her name at the moment, but she is quite known within the communities of campaigning for human rights and Aboriginal rights within Australia. So I'm not sure whether she supports her father or actually is against him. But yes, it was told that he had abused his own biological daughter as well.
And you wanted to cover something as well. You wanted to just talk about Bill Cook and Amos Nichols and their involvement, their military service background and their involvement Amos's involvement in the CIA?
Well, Phil Cook was part of the Australian legal team for the Australian military in Saigon during the Vietnam War. So he was associated with Amos Nichols, who was also one of the first, who was a military officer who went through American military officer training school, and I was told that he was also an elite member of the CIA, and that he was actually one of the first operatives into Vietnam to organise the drug industry. And he was one of the main organisers of Pol Pot to actually try and create the utopia society. The CIA are still seeking the perfect way to control man, and they do that, it's called the Superman syndrome, to make the superhero, to make the ultimate warrior, thing, and that was a carry-on of Adolf Hitler's and the Nazi Party's experiments of making the ultimate soldier from the Second World War. Many of the scientists who participated in this mind control programming during the Second World War for the Germans were actually put under the Operation Paperclip and taken to America, continue these experiments to be able to control the masses of America through subliminal messaging of acceptance through programs on TV. Think about it. They don't call it program for no reason on TV. You're being programmed to believe through images and word to accept certain things and just say it's normal for society. And by getting people aware of it before they actually get exposed to it in reality means that they're going to be more accepting of it. I saw that they're doing it on TV, and the way they do it in the movies, there's nothing wrong with it. So if they want to do that in real life, let them do it. So, it turned a lot of people away from being able to stand up and expose, the cases like Alan Jones, the cases like Liberace, and Jason, when he actually bought a boy from young Talentine and took him back to back to America.
Liberace, the
money.
one we said, Jamie Redfern,
Yeah, Jamie Redfern, So, Jamie Redfern started out on Young Talentine. Liberace and Johnny Young were good friends. And Johnny Young being a convicted pedophile in Singapore that was covered up in Australia, it just shows that there's more and more links into the entertainment industry in America than what people realise. And it is because many of the main players are now dead. Many people are now able to be able to stand up and have their voice because they were too terrified when that person was alive to speak out because they knew that they'd never make it to court. These people with money are able to buy justice in Australia. It is a known fact that Australia has the best justice system money can buy.
Yeah.
And, it's got nothing to do with truth and justice.
No.
It's to get Australian courts. It's all to get an outcome that suits the courts, not truth and justice. And because of that, they're able to cover it up. The more money you got, you can win a case against someone in Australia for this stuff. And if they've got millions of dollars, they'll just appeal it until you're bankrupt or until they've terrorised you privately for so long that you give up trying to take them on because you realise that they've destroyed your life and they're going to go further and further to do it. They'll buy your suppliers for your business. So you distribute paper cups. They'll buy the distributing company that gives you the cups and then refuse to give you the cups. And then you lose company. This is so, because this was quite phenomenal in Australia, that is why the bikie clubs were formed to actually stop small businesses being bullied by these criminals. Men stuck together and stood by each other for their small businesses that were under attack from these people. And now they're doing it again. The middle class, Malcolm Turnbull's doing it again with saying who can have a business and who can't. Because the people who stand against him, he doesn't want them to have money to be able to oppose them. So how do they do it? They make legislative law saying it is illegal for these sort of people to own certain businesses. So, and even though it might not have an instant impact on their agenda, in 10 years' time, it will, because all of a sudden the percentage of people who are able to stand up to them is being depleted over that 10 years, and then they install the next part of their plan and agenda to turn us all into corporate slaves and it's already done. Like this stuff that's coming out in the Royal Commission now, the only reason they're willing to do that was because so much of the links between the organised pedophiles was covered up in the Children of God cases by John Howard at some phenomenal hour of the morning in Parliament in Canberra under a 90-year lease, under a 90-year seal. If there's nothing to hide, why would you have to put a 90-year seal on the evidence? And why would Mr. Costello go to Hillsong and do a theatrical display on the stage of Hillsong Church for Christianity, and that they'd won just after John Howard had sealed everything in this case.
Boasting.
So boasting, openly boasting that they got away with it. So went back to business. Any person who opposed them, they refused to finance, or he was the head of the tax man, so all of us he was the treasurer. So if you oppose what they were doing, all of a sudden you're being audited by the tax man. The police are pulling you over and booking you for things that weren't even real. And then because you've got no legal support in the sense that you're not entitled to the same way of proving your case as the public prosecutor, you've got to pay for your lawyer. So if you've got no money, you get no justice in Australia. Because you don't get a lawyer. You get legal aid, and they call the Aboriginal Legal Aid Service the Aboriginal Lockup Service, because they're not there to represent the Aboriginal people in law. They're there to represent the law to Aboriginal people within their courts. And yet the wording of it makes it sound as if they're there to represent the Aboriginal people within courts. And yet it's taken over 15 years for the people to realise that's what they're doing, just by their own actions again and again and again. They don't represent anyone unless there's a chance that person is going to jail. So any sort of personal case that of trying to bring child abuse in and all that, their own mandate from funding from the government, they're not allowed to do it. So they can't even assist in exposing the child abuse within the Aboriginal communities that these perpetrators do openly up in the Northern Territory and the outback of Australia. These are managers of communities within white communities, within Aboriginal communities, who hold the keys to the supplies, to your dole, to everything. It's just like having a ration card or being a mission Indigenous person from with no rights 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So if you want to pass, then come out the back, little girl, and come see me out the back, and I'll write that pass so you can leave the mission. But if you don't come out the back and see me, now you're staying on the mission. Now they've gone the opposite way, and they've removed everyone from the missions into the town camps so that they can actually take the children from them, rather than because they're not living up to the quality of standards of living within the Western world, within the town camps. And yet they're given no assistance, they're given no money, they're given no support, no housing, no nothing. They're just taken off their homelands and dumped on the side of the town. And they're not, they're not even allowed to. So many of them lose their way, and they become alcoholics. They get drunk. They see other people within the community doing this stuff, and so they do it, and then they get caught and persecuted. And yet when they turn around and say, "Oh, Joe is doing," "Oh, well, mate, prove it," and they can't. So there's a very strong, old, ancient culture being destroyed by these events, because by removing them from the homeland, the children are vulnerable. If they're on the homelands, they decide to stay on the homelands, then it's still not safe there, because what happens is the docks workers come in and say, oh, you're not sending your children to school, we're going to remove them from you and put them in school. Oh, but can't you send a teacher out to us? Oh, no, that'll cost the government too much money. No, we'll take your children and put them in school. And that's what they do to people who do want to sit upon their homelands to protect it for native title. They threaten to take the children off them because they're not being educated in the Western world. And once the children are away from their parents, they lose their protection. So they latch onto the first person who acts nice to them. So, and that's usually an enabler or groomer within the education department.
Oh, yeah.
Who then says, oh, I'll look after you. Come here, little boy.
Yeah, I know of cases I know of a lot of cases in Northern Territory where pedophiles within the education department, and the pedophilia goes right to the top of the education department up there as well, just like it does in New South Wales and Queensland. Yeah.
The education system in Australia was actually set up by a pedophile, and that was Commander Walpole, who was an American slave trader who was commissioned by the English to bring convicts to Australia, because he already had ships set up to carry human cargo, because he'd been part of the American slave trade and was running slaves to America. So Walpole actually set up the education. You have a look at the Walpole family within the Education Department of Australia. They founded it, and they founded it through opening the first orphanage of Australia for children, and that was Mount Penang Boys Home. That used to be a child's orphanage, because after Walpole destroyed the path of rights of the Aboriginal people by massacring and murdering them, of the warriors, he was then given the position of the governor of the orphans. So Commander Walpole then went back to England, emptied all the orphanages in Scotland, Wales, and England and Ireland of all the children, brought them back to Australia from England, set up Mount Penang Orphanage, and the children were day labour to the local farmers. And there are many cases of child abuse by these farmers. Now, that man's family run for many years the education department. You have a look at how many Walpoles are on the Board of Education.
Yeah.
And yet many of these children died by self-inflicted strangulation. You read the reports for the deaths of the children out of Mount Penang Boys Home, it's a maximum security boys home now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have a look at the early transcripts of children who, say, had fallen out of a tree and broken a leg or something like that, and all of a sudden they died of self-strangulation. No, the only doctor was in Sydney, and they were only a child. They weren't going to send for a doctor for a child, so they choked them and killed them because it was too expensive to get the doctor to come up to the orphanage. So, Walpole, the family of Walpole, have been instigators of child grooming and programming for these child abusers since the founding of the education department. And because of that, it's covered up.
I've dealt with a lot of. We're just coming up to the hour now, and we have to finish up now. But I have, and this is for another show, I suppose. I've dealt with a lot of victims from Mount Penang and Darrick Boys Home, various boys' homes where they've actually were prostituted, and you had quite a number of the people that we've been talking about today used to visit these boys' homes and have sex with the boys or take them home and whatever. But that's another show, Laurence. We've come to the end of this one, and I think we could. I think we need to do another show. Hey, this is just crazy.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So, well, I don't know. I don't know about you, but I need a beer or something.
Well, I don't drink. I haven't had a drink in 13 years.
Haven't you? Well, I'm not supposed to drink. I'm very restricted now because it turns out I've got migraines that are affected by just about everything I can eat. So,
well, my depression goes haywire if I drink or take drugs. So I just don't drink or take drugs.
Well, I'll tell you what. My brain is just mush now. I'm you know, what can I say? The more people I interview about all this sort of thing, the less I realise I knew. So I just want to thank you, Laurence, and I just want to make it known to people that if anything happens to any of these people that I've interviewed, Laurence, myself, it's because of what we've just spoken about. We are not suicidal. You've just heard Laurence say he doesn't take any substances. You know, I don't take any illicit substances.
And I would never take my own life because it's against my beliefs.
Yeah, and I'm a born again Christian, and you don't commit suicide. You know, if you're a born again Christian, that's what kept me going all these years, and made that off the cards. You know, that option. So
well, that was what got me into this. Was that I became a born again Christian, and the minister who actually I confessed all this stuff to was the one who actually organised the interview up at Teen Challenge, and was also the minister who sees the videotape of Teen Challenge when Graham Tremblay and Gregory Sullivan wanted to take all 3 tapes. So I know there are some good people in there who are trying. And
they're deceived, aren't they? They don't realise, you know, like you'll have some good people within the Catholic Church, you'll have good people within Hillsong, but they're absolutely brainwashed by what is effectively a cult. So on that note, Laurence,
they use the Christian stuff to, you know, they say, you got to forgive them.
Yeah, I know.
You've got to forgive them.
And
they
the
use
other
the
one,
actual
and the other one they say,
to cover it up.
And the other one they say, just quickly, the other one they say is, how dare you, you know, mess with God's anointed? You know, like Frank Houston was God's anointed. You know, I mean, that's just cover up language. That's just if you talk that about something that's been in the papers, then you're a pedophile protector. That's all you are. You're not a Christian.
Yep.
So thanks very much, Laurence, and we'll leave it there. And let's do this again, hey?
Yeah, for sure, Fiona. Okay. And I hope everyone understands that. We are trying our best down here in Australia to expose this international pedophile ring that links Europe, America, North and South America, Canada, and Australia. And a lot of it went through a little island called Tahiti.
Yeah.
The money laundering island of Australia and America.
Right.
So thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you. That was Laurence, and I'm Fiona Barnett, and this is Pedophiles Down Under. Thank you very much.
And we'll get all our friends around us, and we'll sing a song together.
1, 2, 3, 4, my